परिचयम् राष्ट्रभारत्यः अस्तु द्वितीयम् इतिहासस्य सुष्ठुरक्षणम् विराट हिन्दुस्तान संघटनम् विश्वं भूयानीडमेकम् आद्य कर्तव्य तृतीयम् संस्कृत साहित्यः पुरसारणम् हिन्दू हितार्थ आवश्यकमिदम् संस्कृत वाण्यः सुरक्षणम् सर्वजनैस्तु आत्मस्वरूपम् मनसा बुद्ध्या परीक्षणीयम् अर्थार्जनस्य धर्माधारम् दृढ भवतु ध्येयं चतुर्थम् पञ्चेतड राम राज्यं सुराज्यं राज्य प्रजानां निश्चयमेकम् इदं पञ्चकं भवतु ध्येयम् विराट हिंदुस्तान संघटनम। भारत माता की जय।
Gaddi ji, you are muted.
Good evening, everyone. So we are welcoming two guest speakers today, Sree Nischala Manyam ji and Kanakavalli Santhanam. So they are going to speak on the subject matter of strength and rights of women in Bharatiya Parampara. So I will have their brief introduction. First, I will introduce Srimati Sree Nischala Manyam ji. She is a biotechnologist with a passion for ancient Indian knowledge systems. She enjoys being a part of the intellectual yajna to bring ancient values and concepts back into usage in contemporary education and society. Her work is in Dharmaviki.org involves actively researching and compiling material on diverse socio-cultural and technological topics from ancient Sanskrit literature. So once again, we welcome Sree Nischala Manyam ji. Now I introduce Kanakavalli Santhanam. She has been associated with Dharmaviki.org as an author since last 4 years. She has primarily been involved in creating well-researched article compilations across categories like Vedanta, Dharmas, Shastras, and Vedas. With a bachelor in Sanskrit and a master in Sanskrit and music, she describes herself as a seeker in the fields of Sanskrit music and dance. Understanding ancient Indian culture, tradition, philosophy, and literature forms the broad canopy of her studies. So we welcome both of you as an esteemed guest speaker for this session. So now I request Sree Nischala Manyam ji kindly take over the session and please enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.
I'm very happy to be here speaking about this topic today. The International Women's Day is on March 8th, and I'm glad to be participating in this topic about women. So moving on into the actual course. So we have seen the topic today is the strengths and rights of women in Bharatiya Parampara, with special focus on education and marriage through the Vedic and Smriti times. Some contemporary issues will also be addressed, but primarily the focus is on Vedic and Smriti times. So we have seen that the role of women in the Bharatiya perspective is unique and is most exclusive. It's one of the only of its kind, and Bharatiya Nari is primarily worshipped as a Devata. Wherever we go, however we see, whatever problems we have faced with respect to women, till today, the core of the Indian civilization treats Nari in a very sacred and a very positive way, in a very positive way. She is first a Duhita, a daughter, a Bhagini or sister to a brother. Then after marriage, she becomes a Grihini, a wife, a Mata. Then later on, once the children of the family are coming into the picture. Apart from these three main identities of women, we have seen that a Rishika is there, an Apsara is there, then a Vidhava is also there, a Dasi is there, and all these roles of women have also been dealt with in the Vedic literature. They have been described, they have been widely encouraged, supported in various forms. We see that the status of women has been there in many perspectives, like social, whether she is inferior, whether she has any freedom, does she have a choice of her own life, does she have a say in the household, or if it is cultural, whether she's participating in festivities or samskaras, how important are the samskaras for her, the sacraments which everyone goes through. And this is one of the Hindu identities that we have till today, which are being practiced. So does she have any religious identity? Does she participate in yajnas? Is she having any deva puja for her own self? Does she have any mental and physical and physiological, psychological impact with all these kind of identities on her? Does she have an administrative role? Is she active in a political field? So all these, for example, even the legal, on the legal front, does she have a voice in front of a council? Is there any inheritance or property in her name? If it is there, then what is, does she have anything on her own? Does she control it? Or is it that she's controlled by somebody else? For all these kind of factors, we primarily see that two broad systems have influenced the women's status, and they are education and marriage. Marriage and education both are very important sanskaras in the life of a male child as well as for a female child. But that importance, how is it given to the women? How is the girl child treated? Does she have the same samskaras? Does she have the same rights as does the man? So all these factors have to be considered while determining the status of women. Now, there are many myths also that are floating around for centuries, and I should say for the past, ever since the Christian era has started. There have been different versions. There have been myths that have been interpretations and extrapolations of various kinds. We hear quite often that women in ancient times were uneducated, so they had no importance. And they were not having any role in performing yajnas, nor did they have any role in the Deva Puja or Brahma Yajna or the Panchamaha Yajnas. Or the samskaras are not meant for women. We quite often hear that. And girls also were not allowed to decide their own course of life. Somebody has to tell them whether they have to get married, or somebody has to tell them that this is you should study this or you shouldn't read this. So these myths are quite, I should say, quite undermining the faith of the people in general. For a Sanatana Dharmi, how does it affect the mentality, and how does he reflect back on the society? With all these myths floating around, how does the newer generation look upon women in general? And what is the place for Sanatana Dharma in a new generation? So all these have to be very thoroughly studied and brought out for posterity, I should say, because they should be maintained for generations to come. With this aim, we have also seen that girls were remaining secluded in their homes. And with such kind of a society, They were only doing domestic work. With all these kind of myths about education, we have myths about marriage too, where the girl child is said to be unwelcome in the family. If she's born, we have to give dowry to her and have to send her to another family. Then child marriages were also prevalent in earlier times, though it has reduced now a little bit. Still, we do see some child marriages occurring even in these days. Then women are not independent to choose their own life partner. Then polygamy was also acceptable. What was her mental status among sapatnis? Or if she became a widow, she was a bane to the society. So with all these kind of the myths that have been floating around, what was the real status of women with respect to education and marriage in the Vedic times? I would be talking about that aspect in greater detail. We see in the Rigvedic times also that we had suktas given by devatas like Saraswati, Aditi, and others. So mainly the role was of Mata. If it is a mother, how is she looked upon as? She was a Janani or a procreative Shakti with knowledge, patience, ethics, and values of prime importance to her. She does all the duties of a mother, and this duty is represented by the Pancha Nari Tattva in the Samhitas. Those Pancha Naris are Prithvi, Go, Aditi, Usha, and Ratri. If we look at these names are we know that in Rigveda that natural phenomena were deified, personified, and they were highly praised. Stotras were conducted, and that gave them benefits. That's how the system ran. So if we see the qualities of Prithvi, she's an exemplary person for patience. Gau, selfless service. Aditi, motherly care and nourishment. Usha, for knowledge. Ratri, for relaxation. So even though they were natural phenomena, they had been given the exalted position of a mother. Then we move on to find that Kanya, or a daughter, was also highly welcome in the family. We also find that she was the foundation of the society. She was a symbol of character, affection, and purity. She was called Kulapa. Kulapa is one who upholds both the sides of the family, like before marriage and after marriage. She is the cause for the upliftment of that Kula, the clan itself, of the father and of the husband. With such a pivotal role, a Kanya had to be groomed into a situation where she can be trained to manage both the households with respect and uphold the traditions as they have been transferred to her. So Dyava and Prithvi in the Rigveda have been mentioned as sisters who have exemplary characteristics of a Kanya. And so also Sukanya. She was the Rajakumari who was married to Chyavana Maharshi. So before marriage, how was she raised? As a daughter of a king, and then how should she behave after getting married to Chyavana Maharshi? The duties of a Kanya in general included Vedadhyan, milking and protecting the cows. That is the reason why she was called Duhita. She was called, Dohana is the Kriya or the activity of milking. So from that came the name Duhita. Then again, she was participating in domestic chores, agricultural activities, water collection. She was also trained in music, dance, and fine arts, sewing, embroideries, etc. Then we move on to the Patni, the role of the wife. After marriage, she becomes a Gruhini, a girl becomes a Gruhini, and she goes on to become a Pativrata. She became the symbol for service, organization, and selflessness. And in Rigveda, we see Ghosha, who took care of Atidhi Satkara and how to conduct yajnas and all these kind of suktas for which she was the mantra drashta. So Sukanya, again, as a wife of Maharshi Chavana, has laid down important rules as to how a wife should conduct herself. So the duties of a wife included participation in yajnas, maintaining the agnis, because in those days the Srauta yajnas and the Gruhya yajnas were prevalent in every home. Then she took care of the food, clothing, and comforts of all the family, raising the family. She also took care of the cows and cattle. She had a duty towards the guests. And then again, in music and craft, she had her role. So in all these roles and activities, we find that the two important samskaras, mainly the Upanayana samskara and marriage, the Vivaha samskara, played great role. So coming to that topic, we need to understand why this path of women was twofold. I would like to project the article of Dharmaviki here. So, so even though the topic is titled Brahmavadini, who is a Brahmavadini? What is her role? What exactly is she? A Brahmavadini is a highly intelligent and a greatly learned woman who chose the path of Vedic studies. She speaks about Brahman and she represents the concept of Shakti. She shows an immense mental and physical capability. In many civilizations, we had unsatisfactory history as regards to the position of women. But here in the Vedas, we find that we have many women who are highly educated and who have been greatly associated with intellectual activities such as debates and writing philosophical subjects, writing on philosophical subjects. So they had great liberty to choose what they wanted to do. There were no societal sanctions on them, or the sanctions were very minimal, that they could maintain all the principles of Sanatana Dharma. Here we see that the path of education and marriage had played a very important role in the life of a woman. We see that Bharatiya Nari proved her intellectual excellence by having lofty philosophical ideas. And she became the mantra drashta of even Rigvedic suktas. Rigveda is, as everybody knows, the oldest text that exists on earth today. So she had both the society, the role in the society, and important functions, which included the yajnas along with the husband. Apart from that, she was also free to choose whether she wanted to take up higher education or whether she wanted to go for marriage. But there were no child marriages in Vedic period. Here we see in Harita Smriti that women are of two classes, Brahmavadini and Sadyavadu. Brahmavadini is eligible for Upanayana. Actually, both are eligible for Upanayana. And the Brahmavadini, she went on to study Vedas, perform Agnyadhana and other Vedic rituals, practice Bhiksha and Brahmacharya Ashrama within the household. The Sadyavadu also performed had the Upanayana performed before she was married. And she learned some important Vedic mantras necessary for the regular prayers and the yajnas conducted in a grihasthashrama. We even see that apart from these philosophical or main Vedic studies, there are temporal subjects also that were studied by women in those days, and mainly the Chatushashti Kalas. And even they were the ladies of the Kshatriya caste. They received training in martial arts courses and wielding arms. And it's good to know that good co-education had existed in the Vedic period. Both male and female students intermingled and got equal attention from the teacher. Then we see who is a Sadyavadu? Why is there a necessity of education for marriage? So as I told earlier, Sadyavadus are those who became brides immediately after attaining puberty, and they took the Upanayana ceremony before their marriage and had some minimal Vedic studies. Now, if in such cases, marriage education was necessary because it made the task easier for the parents to find a husband for her, because both Rigveda, Yajurveda and other Vedas, Atharvaveda also, they have stated that a learned daughter should be married to a bridegroom who is just like her learned. And it also emphasizes that there should be no child marriage. There are many references here, which we can see the Strauta and Kruti Sutras, and even Hemadri of Dharma Sindhu. He has composed the latest Dharma Sindhu. So with this background that women should be educated, they had to do yajnas along with the husband, because the householder is not eligible to perform yajnas if he does not have a wife. So, and the wife had her part to play in revealing the mantras and saying the mantras. She was offering Agnihotra and other activities when he was not at home. We see this in the later yugas also, with in the case of Vali, Tara, the wife of Vali, and Sita, the wife of Lord Sri Rama. So, and even Kaushalya, actually, Ramachandra's mother, she was offering havis and doing yajnas. So, what is the importance of Upanayana Samskara for women? The scheme of education framed by the ancient Bharatiyas to initiate the young children, this was not a primitive idea. This scheme to initiate young children, to prepare them for the full citizenship, is not a primitive idea. It had evolved over time. No one without Upanayana could call himself a twice born. So, Purakalpe tu narinam maunti bandhanam ichyate, adhyapanancha vedanam savitri vachanan tatha. This was the prime eligibility. The girls were eligible for Upanayana Samskara. They could study Veda and say the Savitri mantra. They followed the regulations of Brahmacharya Ashrama, but they were excluded from, they had some concessions. They were excluded from wearing deerskin and bark garments and need not have cropped hairs. Some girls went on to study further. And girls usually only studied under their own father, brothers, or within their family members. They begged for bhiksha within the family roof only. And people actually wanted progeny who became, the girls who became Brahmavadini. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also prescribed some methods to do obtain such a progeny. So we see the Brahmavadinis, which are Rishikas, who gave so many mantras, even in the time of Panini. Here we can see that there were many lady scholars who studied Vedas and even taught Vedas. So as you see, there is a list of Rishikas who gave many mantras in the Rig Veda. Romasa, Lopamudra, Apala, Kadru, Vishwavara, Ghosha, Vagambrani, Paulami, Urvashi, Yami, Indrani, Savitri. All these ladies had great intellectual excellence. We should listen to Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya Samvada. And it shows the philosophical bent of Maitreyi. Vishwavara, she was again a seer, woman seer of Rigveda Mandala 5. So like this, Ghosha, she was a Rishika, daughter of Rishi Kakshivan. Gargi, she was very famous. Gargi and Yajnavalkya had a great discussion in the court of Janaka. And she questions him about Brahmajnana. So we have such great scholars, women scholars. Vagambrani, her sukta is given in the Devi Mahatmyam. It is studied till day. Romasha, she was the daughter of Bruhaspati. So all these ladies had undergone the Upanayana Samskara and went on to become great scholars. And Varna did not, or ashrama was not a hindrance to them in doing their duties. So we have, they even taught large number of students. So they became upadhyayas and supported many schools. But as we see, many women, we see now that we can just summarize here. Education about women in ancient India, we can summarize that education of a girl child in higher studies was encouraged by her parents. Upanayana Sanskara of the girl child was performed for the initiation into Vedic path on par with the male child. She was protected and educated with special rules of Brahmacharya Ashrama. She had a choice of the subject. She could choose whether she wanted to study further or get married. She mingled easily within the co-education system. She did not have to worry about the cost of the education. Mainly, it was generally free in those days. But even if the Guru Dakshina had to be given, it was taken care of the parents. So in view of this, even till the early centuries, even till the recent centuries, we see that in our literature and history, women were encouraged to study, had their own course of marriage they preferred. But with the advent of the Mohammedans, we see that the upper classes of the society began to seclude their women. And what happened in the further stages, it is well known. The education of the girl child declined with the invasion of the foreigners, and the girl child protection became paramount. So now we kind of summarize the reasons for decline in the Upanayana and Vedic studies. Gradually, as the Vedic period ended and the society started changing, the life of women, the Jivan Vidhana had changed. Women were more actively involved in their services in the family, to the family members. So at the time of composition of the Brahmanas, the volume of the Vedic studies became extensive. The subject became vast. Long time periods of study was required. The spoken dialect had changed. The language used in the Vedas became different from what was being spoken. So to commit all the Vedic mantras to memory became a long process, a time-taking process. And everybody feared that if a mistake is committed in the Vedic mantra, then it would produce a disastrous consequence on the reciter. As a consequence, society began to insist only some people could take up Vedic studies to devote a fairly long period of time. And because women had to be married by the age of 16, they could only give a few years of their life to Vedic studies. So gradually they started losing out on that time, and Vedic girl scholars, lady scholars became rarer. Vedic yajnas also became very complicated. Women, as they reduced their time of study, their participation in the yajnas became a mere formality. And many ritviks were engaged in the process of yajna, so the participation of women was not required. The wife who was originally offering havis and other activities in the yajnas, in the absence of a husband, excuse me, that activity was taken over by the son and other family members. So gradually, with the Upanayana Samskara being prohibited for women, her religious identity got lost. The samskaras of the social identity got diluted. It was just a formality. And later on, the theory came about that service for the husband became more important, and she gradually became engaged in the household activities. So this caused the women to lose their, there was a big difference in the social status and their political and all the other things came in the forefront. Even to a certain extent, Buddhism and Jainism were also a cause in the decline of Upanayanas, because ritualistic activities were countered by them. Gradually, women, because they had to be protected from other men, they could not move about freely. So liberty became a big issue. Upanayana became meaningless, and gradually Upanayana stopped. So with this, the fall of the women's status in the society, we see how the status changed with the subsequent times. I would like to stop sharing here, and Valiji, if you can take over the next step as to what happened to the women to this day.
Thank you so much, Nischala ji, for that wonderful enumeration. So we saw that the Vedas reflected the stature of women in the society, their duties, their roles as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife, as a mother. And we realized that she had an individual identity, and she also had a role in the family, thereby contributing in the society in her own manner. Now, in the subsequent times, as the need arose, our ancient rishis and acharyas made a note of their societal framework, the Bharatiya societal framework, through the Dharma Sutras and the Smriti texts. Now, the Smriti texts address practical aspects of dharma like achara, vyavahara, etc. So they deal with general code of conduct, day-to-day social and financial dealings. What are the codes of conduct in a society? What is ethical conduct? What are an individual's role? What is the role of an individual in the society? What is the role of an individual in nation building, etc. So, however, these Smriti texts were also based on the Shrutis, which are the Vedas. Apart from being based on the Vedas, they also took into account the traditional or conventional practices which are known as Samayachara, which of course were also based on Vedic principles. So we see that whatever was reflected in the Vedic texts, Vedic Samhitas, those strains are continue to be reflected in the Smriti texts as well, irrespective of the changing social conditions, thereby establishing an uninterrupted continuity of the Bharatiya Parampara. For example, Nischala ji spoke about education and marriage, how education and marriage were interlinked, and how education was a qualification for marriage, etc., etc. So in a similar fashion, the Manusmriti says that Utkrishtaya Abhirupaya Varaya Sadrishaya Cha Tasmai Kanyam Dadyat. So you give your daughter to somebody who is equal to her, not only in appearance, but in quality and learning as well. And it doesn't stop there. It goes on in the next verse to say that Amaranat Tishthet Grihe Kanya Nachaivam Prayachet Gunahinaya. Even if there is a condition wherein you do not find a suitable groom and the Kanya decides to stay with the father until the end of her life, even that is acceptable, but you are not to give the Kanya to somebody who is devoid of good qualities, which shows that the daughter or the Kanya was not a burden on the family or the father. And Nischala ji already enumerated how the Vedic rishis prayed to gain Brahmavadinis as their daughters. So this shows how there is a strain of continuity in the thought process reflected in the Vedas, in the Smriti texts as well. Now these Smriti texts not just act as reflections of the then society, but they also act as injunctions, wherein what to do, how to do, when to do, these matters are discussed in the Smriti texts and the commentaries on them. Therefore, in the Smritis, we see them devising provisions for the welfare of women as an integral part of the society. And if I may say so, there is a threefold way in which we may conceive the provisions that we see in the Smriti Shastras for the welfare, towards the welfare of women. One is like we already saw, the women had an individual identity, she had a role in the family, and thereby she had her own contributions to the society as well. So keeping in line with that thought process, in the Smriti Shastras also we see verses which enumerate provisions for welfare of women in terms of the individual level, in terms of the social level, and as well as in terms of financial level. Now in the individual level, they bring about this kind of an injunction or a rule or the framework through what we call as sadachara, by cultivating the quality of respect for womanhood. In the social level, this is brought forth through vyavahara, by entrusting the responsibility of protection of women to specific people in the society, specific people related to her through her lifetime. And in the financial side of it, we see provisions designed for her financial inheritance. So it is beautiful to see how the Smriti Shastras have made provisions at the individual, social and financial levels for the welfare of women. Now in this context, I would like to share my screen and take you to an article on the website dharmawiki.org. Is the screen sharing visible?
No,
You can't see the article.
no, it's not visible.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I said, there were provisions made in the individual, social and financial levels for the protection and welfare of women. And I said that in the individual level, this was brought forth by inculcating the concept of respect for womanhood as a fundamental value in the Dharmika and Bharatiya viewpoint. And in this context, I would like to mention a very famous verse from the Manusmriti, which says, Yatra naryastu pujyante tat ramante tatra devataha yatraitastu na pujyante sarvas tatra phala kriyaha, which says that deities are pleased with those households wherein women are honored and respected, and where that is not the case, any endeavor taken in such a environment where she is not respected and honored is sure to end in a failure. And they don't stop in that one verse. This is the verse that is most famously quoted, but there are two more verses after this one which elaborates on this concept and says that wherever the daughter, daughter-in-law, sister and other women folk of the house suffer, that house is sure to get destroyed. And in the house where she is happy, it is that house that secures wealth and happiness. And the family where the women folk, wife, daughter, sister, etc. are not respected, they suffer from insult and they are sure to be destroyed. Now, it is not so that they enumerate this as a quality and leave it at that. It is interesting to see that later on, they give us an example of how this is to be practiced. So in our Bharatiya Parampara, we say Athithi Devo Bhava. So the guest who arrives is equal to Bhagavan himself. But in the Manusmriti, and we know that when the guests arrive, the rule of a grihastha is that first the guest is fed, and only after that does he himself and his family members partake of food. But in the Manusmriti, it is said that Suvasinihi Kumarishcha Rogino Garbhini Striyaha Atitibhyogra Eva Etan Bhojayet Avicharayan. So even though Atithi is equal to God and he is to be fed first, it is said that you should not think twice. Avicharayan, even without thinking twice, one should feed Suvasini, Kumari and Garbhini Stri. So Suvasini refers to a newly married daughter or a daughter-in-law who comes to the house. Kumari is a young child Kumari, and Garbhini Striya is a expecting woman. So in case of these women, it is said that without a second thought, a grihastha may feed them even before feeding the guest, which shows how there has been a very deep thought given to the mental state of women also. When a woman is newly married, she will not be comfortable to ask if she is hungry. A small child may not be comfortable to say that she is hungry. Okay, so that kind of thought process has gone behind giving these verses. Now, after having seen this, these 3-4 verses which explain the importance given to the respect for womanhood, the question is arised as to how come in the same text there is a verse which ends with the last quarter, Nastri Swatantriyam Arhati, which is commonly translated and discussed as woman should not be given freedom. Now in this context, I would like to present a very interesting discussion that has been that has come up in a book called Dharma, the Global Ethic, wherein it is very interestingly put forth that instead of seeing that 1/4 of the verse, it has to be seen in the context of the other 3/4 of the same verse, as also the content that comes before the other verses that have already been enumerated in the previous part of the Smriti text. Now, therefore, if you see the entire verse, it reads as Pita rakshati kaumare, bharta rakshati yauvane, rakshanti sthavire putra, nastri swatantriyam arhati. Now, what is to be noted here is the term rakshati, which refers to protection, which means that father protects in the childhood, the husband protects in youth, and the son protects in the old age. Now, therefore, in the discussion, the author beautifully put forth that by nature, womanhood is tender. And there are many situations wherein women require greater care, protection, and security. They are vulnerable to various kinds of onslaughts if left unprotected. And therefore, he says that it is imperative to revisit the meaning and the purpose of this above verse, which rather seems to be a woman requires and is entitled to protection at every stage of life. And correspondingly, the duty of that protection is entrusted to the father, husband, and sons to look after the daughter, wife, and mother respectively. So another way and a very convincing way of looking at this verse is that it is a mandate, or rather an obligation of the father, husband, and son to protect the women of their house, rather than focusing on that one quarter of the verse and translating it as subjugation of woman. And this I would also like to emphasize from a quotation that is there in the book, The Essential Teachings of Hinduism, where the author says, in the Bharatiya Parampara, a woman is looked after not because she is inferior or incapable, but on the contrary, because she is treasured. She is the pride and power of the society. And just as crown jewels should not be left unguarded, neither should women be left unprotected. And he also mentions how the woman already bears huge responsibilities individually in the family and thereby towards the society in terms of childbirth, child care, domestic well-being, spiritual growth, as well as transmission of culture to her children. And therefore he says that no extra burden of earning a living should be imposed on her. And thereby we see that in the Smritis, apart from making provisions for her welfare in the individual and in the societal level through achara and vyavahara, that is by cultivation of the quality of respect for womanhood and by entrusting the responsibility of their protection to specific people, it also creates financial inheritance rules. Okay, so when we talk about her financial inheritance, the first term that comes to our mind is Stridhana. Now, Stridhana is any movable, immovable property that is given to a woman as a gift by anyone, and that constitutes her own absolute property. And it is said that no one from the family or otherwise is to live off her property. Now, it is interesting to note here that it is said the rule of succession for Stridhana, we very commonly hear that the son is the successor of the father as far as the inheritance is concerned. But here for Stridhana it is said that it would go to the daughters. Matustu yautakam yat syat kumari bhaga eva saha. That will go only to the kumari. And here yautaka refers to the property of the woman. And it's not just the gift that she receives as part of wedding, etc. But the commentators also apply it to whatever savings a young woman makes out of the expenses that she receives for the upkeep of the household or for buying clothes, ornaments, etc. from the grihastha. So all that. So this trend is actually seen in our society even today, where the Sree have this ability of what we call as bachat, little by little saving. So all that is considered as her Sree Dhana, and that is given to the daughter. Now, does that mean she had no rights in the family property? So in our parampara, it is said that after marriage, the woman becomes a part of her husband's family, and therefore her inheritance rights are described as a wife and as a mother. So the Yajnavalkya Smriti says that the wife is entitled to a share equal to that of the sons. And reiterating this fact towards the sons, it is said, Samamshaharini Mata. Just as a wife is entitled to equal share, it is told to the sons also that your mother is entitled to equal share. And so if the daughter is unmarried, then what is her status? So if a daughter's marriage has already taken place, of course, she has her rights as wife. Do I have a couple of more minutes? I'm just finishing. I know we are close to 10. Just 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So, so even though as married daughters, their rights were enlisted as wives and mothers, as unmarried Kumaris, they did have share in their father's property. So it is said that the brother is to give 1/4 share to the unmarried sister. And while elaborating on this particular provision, it is said in the commentary that in case the property is very small and the 1/4 part of the property is not sufficient for the sister's maintenance, then the brothers and the sisters share the property equally. And she shares it until she gets married. And when she gets married, she leaves with 1/4 of the share. And it is in this sense that it is said that Jivati Pitari Tadichaya Mulyenapi Dhanena Sankriyante Mritetu Amshahara iti. That means when the father is there, her marriage is celebrated with lot of joy and lot of pomp and show. But even when he is not there, she inherits his property. Now, what happens if there are no brothers? If the father has an only child or has children who are only daughters. Now, the Manusmriti mentions a practice of making one's daughter's son as one's heir, successor. So, so such a daughter who does not have brothers and whose son can be made her father's successor, she is known as Putrika. And in this case, the example of Daksha Prajapati is given, which states that there can be more than one Putrikas. It's not needed that there should be only one Putrika. And in this context, the Manusmriti emphasizes that the son is one's own self, but the daughter is equal to the son. So, Putrena Duhita Sama, and implying that if at the time of the father's death, the Putrika has no child, she cannot be denied the right to inherit her father's property. And in case a son happens to be born to her father after she has been declared as his Putrika, then her son and the father's son share the property equally. Now, with this, I would like to conclude that the strains of thought visible towards women in the Vedic era, they continue to be seen in the Smriti texts as well. And it is interesting to note how a detailed thought has been gone into creating provisions for her welfare in both the individual, social as well as financial level. I thank for your patient hearing and for giving us this opportunity to showcase the articles that we've been compiling on dharmawiki.org, and we request you to please visit the site and please give your feedback and contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Sree Nischala ji and Kanakavalli
Thank
ji,
you.
for giving such a great insight about women from the Vedic perspective. So we came to know really very wonderful information, rather knowledge about this. Thanks a lot. We will just try to get some questions from the chat box. I think I don't find any. Anyone want to
I
ask
have
the
one
questions? Please, Rajiv ji, ask the question.
मैं सबसे पहले तो धन्यवाद करूंगा निश्चला जी का और कनकवली जी का, जिन्होंने आज हमें अच्छी तरह से एनलाइटन किया वुमेन स्ट्रेंथ एंड राइट्स इन भारतीय परंपरा। मैं निश्चला जी से कनकवली जी से एक क्वेश्चन करूंगा कि अभी जो वुमेन राइट्स दिया है प्रॉपर्टी में गवर्नमेंट ने, तो इट्स ऑलरेडी इक्वल टू सन, मतलब अभी कोई इसमें 1/4 आपने जैसे बताया कि स्पिरिचुअल उसमें अपने धर्म के शास्त्रों में 1/4 राइट्स दिया है पुत्री को और पुत्र को ज्यादा राइट्स दिया है। तो ये अभी पिताजी के प्रॉपर्टी में भी उनको 50% राइट्स मिलता है और हस्बैंड के पास जाते हैं वहीं पर भी 50% राइट्स मिलता है। तो ये कहीं ना कहीं पुत्रों को अन्याय नहीं है? दैट्स माय क्वेश्चन। या आप इसको कुछ एनलाइटन करें कि हाउ टू दिस फेवर मोर फेवर टू वुमन। आप अनम्यूट होइए। यस।
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very interesting question, but the simple answer I would like to give here is our society is evolving day to day. Okay, even in the Smriti times, if you see, Manusmriti is said to be for Krita Yuga, then Yajnavalkya Smriti for Treta Yuga, and Shankalikita for Dwapara and Parashara for Kali Yuga. So these laws keep changing from time to time, and we know that amendments keep happening from time to time. So the only comment I would like to make here is abhi jo hai so hai, and I don't think it is unequal share per se. I mean, it's also individual perspective. I'm not very much into contemporary, political and, legislative kind of a fora. So I will not be the right person to comment on whether it is equal or unequal. But what I would like to say is time is always changing, rules are always changing. So maybe this will also change. If you think it is unequal, maybe there will be a time when that will change.
Yeah, thank you. And I have one small question. But हमारे में कंकु कन्या विवाह भी होता है जिसमें कन्यादान नहीं होता है। हेलो।
Yes, I'm sure. We can hear you.
Yeah. कंकु कन्या का जो विवाह होता है उसमें वर पक्ष की तरफ से ये रिक्वेस्ट की जाती है कि आप हमें कोई भी स्त्री धन ना दे, हमें सिर्फ कन्या का ही दान करें। तो उसे हमारे कास्ट में उसे कंकु कन्या कहते हैं कि वो सिर्फ एक शादी का जोड़ा पहन के ही शादी करके हस्बैंड के घर जाती है। तो उनके लिए स्त्री धन क्या होता है? सिर्फ एक मंगलसूत्र ही रहेगा स्त्री धन उनका, या उनकी सिक्योरिटी क्या रहेगी इन शॉर्ट?
So if I understand correctly, the Stridhan actually in the ancient times also refers to what the husband's side gives to the girl's side in return of the Kanyadana. Nischala ji, please correct me if I'm wrong. That is one of the aspects of, Stridhana. So I am not aware of the specific practice that you are talking about. But एक चीज है कि as you correctly put forth in your previous question, पहले के लॉज में और अभी के लॉज में काफी फर्क है. So that time स्त्री धना अभी काउंट करना इट विल बी आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट, क्योंकि अभी वो स्त्री धन का कॉन्सेप्ट ही नहीं फॉलो कर रहे हैं ना हम. अभी तो मॉडर्न लेजिस्लेशन के हिसाब से वी आर फॉलोइंग.
नहीं, आज भी इनकम टैक्स में स्त्री धन को बात किया जाता है. मतलब जब आईटी रेड होती है तो दे कैन नॉट सीज स्त्री धन. अगर वो स्त्री कहती है कि ये मेरा स्त्री धन है तो दे कांट सीज.
And this has been mentioned, and this has been mentioned in the कात्यायन स्मृति, जहाँ पे कहा जाता है कि आप कुछ भी छीन सकते हो, but there can never be a partition or takeaway of property that belongs to the state, the temple, and the woman. That is the Sree.
May I add here, sir? You were saying that even whatever be the form of marriage, once a girl gets married, the laws that apply are almost always universal, in the sense whatever are applied in the Smritis or what is contemporary to the present Dharma, the present Yuga. So given that stage, even if she goes with a Mangal Sutra, whatever she gets from her parents' house becomes her Sri Dhana, and whatever she accumulates from her husband's daily running of the household also becomes her Sri Dhana. So whether or not she brings in a lot of, I should say, a package from her parents' home, she still will be entitled to have Sri Dhana.
Yes, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, because even if she doesn't have previous Sri Dhana, the entire backdoor of the house is given to her, right? So she handles the money aspects as related to the house. So all the little savings that she does every day is her Sri Dhana, and that goes to the daughter, which is mentioned in the Manusmriti and its commentary.
Yeah, I have a question now. First of all, thank you for beautiful, excellent insights on this whole subject. And I think maybe in future we'll have one more session on this, because looks like a little inadequate. However, my question is, Nischala ji mentioned about the Brahmavadinis and the Sattva Yogini.
Satyavadu.
Yeah. So in the Brahmavadinis, they were seen as seers. So many times in the modern era also, people feel that, a woman cannot be a guru. What is your, say, comment on that from the Vedic perspective? Because I am seeing, say, for example, in South, there is Amma. She has millions of people following her, and she's actually inspiring people very nicely. So she's a guru. So what are the Vedic kind of injunctions on being a guru as a woman?
Yes, Vedic provisions, as discussed earlier, we do have upadhyayas, like there were schools and institutions wherein large number of students had studied, girl and boy children, I mean, both the genders had studied, and the teachers there were women who were previously educated in Vedas. So even if there is one course which is a Sadhya Vadu, where the woman does not choose to study further in Vedic areas, there are quite a few seers who are mantra drashtas, and they, in the Rig Veda period itself, in the Paninian Siksha and other texts in the Paninian era also, he has described like a subject of Mimamsa, wherein many number of women students had taken interest, and they had been assigned a special name. So like that, women in particular areas of study have been seen through ages. They have been progressing in their fields, and they have taught others and become gurus to other further subsequent generations. So yes, the Vedic concept very much encourages the existence of gurus among women. Philosophical discussions where Gargi was there. Gargi was, if I recollect rightly, Gargi had maintained a school. In Uttara Ramacharita, we see that we have Atreyi, who was studying along with other students in the Gurukula, and they had become mantradarshas and they had become scholars to teach others. So yes, the parampara of being a guru was not prohibited for women on the Vedic front.
Thank you. Are they given sannyas?
Yes, I don't exactly recollect the names of the sannyasis, but though so yes, there was a mention, but gradually that sannyasa ashrama was not emphasized for women, primarily because of the issues as discussed by Valiji, the protection and sustenance of women. Because of all these reasons, mainly protection in ashramas, protection from the general need, natural forces which are harsh on women. So taking these conditions into consideration, if sannyasa ashrama for women were not greatly prescribed, though we rarely find some in the text, Vedic text, but it's quite rare.
Okay, I think we'll wind up now. So thank you, Nischala ji and Kanakavalli ji. Kanakavalli, sorry. So happy to see you after a long time, even though on screen. And I remember our Virat, Virat Hindustan Sangam's Dharma Wiki grand opening was there, and yes, beautiful program. And Rajiv, you need to, see, basically they are working quietly on Dharma Wiki, and it's such a, you can make out that, such wealth of knowledge they are bringing in, so authentically, and for posterity, as one of them said, it is so important to keep this knowledge alive. Otherwise, the Asurik, in today's terminology, Asurik is similar to leftist, maybe you can say. That thought process will engulf the society in a wrong direction, it will take. So I think as VHS, we should plan some programs so that we can fund them really well, because that is always an issue, because they give their time and everything, and they cannot have simultaneously fund collection for that. So look at that and do it. Yes, Rajiv, you want to say something?
सर अभ्यासी का जो हम ऑडिटोरियम में ले जा रहे हैं,
हाँ,
उसमें धर्मा विकी सबसे टॉप पर है वो टास्क में.
Okay, good.
तो अभी आपने जो बताया कि धर्मा विकी को हम इनकी अवेयरनेस स्प्रेड करेंगे और उनको हेल्प आउट होंगे, जैसे पहले भी विराट हिंदुस्तान संगम ने बहुत बड़ा इवेंट करके इसको लॉन्च किया था. तो हम अभी भी धर्मा विकी के साथ है एंड फ्यूचर में भी साथ में रहेंगे. यस,
थैंक यू.
यस,
सो अजय गांधी जी, टेक इट ओवर.
Thank you, both of you, for wonderful insight. Now we will start our Vande Mataram. I request everyone to kindly rise on our place.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Shasya Shamalam, Mataram, वन्दे